straight 'tis there it was said to lie, the sea route to the Orient for which so many died, seeking gold and glory, leaving weathered, broken bones, and a long forgotten, lonely cairn of stones. For just one time, I would take the Northwest Passage to find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort Sea, tracing one warm line through a land so wide and savage, and make a Northwest Passage to the sea.
Well, thank you and welcome everyone to this very special evening. My name is John Geiger. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, and it's wonderful to join you. And I know most of you, or many of you, know what the Explorers Club is, but in case there are a few of you who don't, you probably have a bit of an idea having entered this remarkable building, but truly this is a global jewel of an institution that not only celebrates exploration, but does a great deal with respect to conservation around the world. And many of the great explorers historically have been fellows or members of the Explorers Club. The flags that are carried are the most prestigious flags that are carried into the field by explorers. It's an amazing institution, and as a fellow of this club and as CEO and fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, we're so honored to have this incredible organization as a partner with our society. And recently we hosted GLEX, the Global Exploration Summit, at our headquarters, 50 Sussex Drive in Ottawa. So it's great to be here. The Royal Canadian Geographical Society is like the RGS in London, an organization similar to the mandate of the Explorers Club. Our particular emphasis, though, is to make Canada better known to Canadians and to the world. So a number of the speakers this evening are actually fellows of the Society. So I was asked, I think, and honored to be here for this very special evening. I want to begin by just quickly introducing the people you'll be seeing up here, and some of them, of course, don't need any introduction. But first of all, Professor Russell Potter. Russell is a professor at the University of Rhode Island, Rhode Island College, and is probably the world's foremost, not probably, he is the world's foremost expert on the Franklin expedition. I've written 2 books on Franklin, but I wish I'd had Russell as a reference. They were before I really had met Russell, but he is truly a global expert on that expedition and Arctic exploration in general. He's absolutely remarkable. And we also have Mike Bedell. Russell, by the way, is a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. Mike Bedell as well is with us. Mike is a photographer and explorer, a fellow of the Society as well, and he has spent, I think, basically most of every year for the past 3 decades in the Arctic. Absolutely amazing amazing guy. And if you can possibly up the ante, Eric Brossier is here, and Eric has spent something like, I'm sure he'll correct me because I'm probably underestimating, but something like 15 years in the ice, in the polar regions, overwintering. He would come out sometimes just long enough for his wife to give birth to children, who he'd then take back to the Vagabond, his vessel. Absolutely, I mean, you know, a lot of people run around calling themselves Arctic explorers. This guy is the real thing. I don't think there's anyone on the planet who spent more time outside of the Inuit communities in the north, who spent more time in this environment and has done more to advance our knowledge of the Arctic regions than Eric. So it's such a pleasure to have him here. We're absolutely blessed. And of course, the person that we're really here to celebrate, Hubert Sagnières, who is recently been made a honorary fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society in Ottawa. We had a wonderful evening around him. Hubert has made countless expeditions into the Arctic. I won't talk about his distinguished corporate career because that would probably consume the entire hour we've devoted to this event. But anyway, please welcome this incredibly distinguished panel.
All right, thank you. So we may occasionally need to pass the microphone, but Hubert and I both have our own, so we shall do our best. All right, well, welcome again to all of you. I think this is an extraordinary group of people. I don't think I've quite ever sat on a pedestal, if it's that what these chairs are, with quite such a group. So I guess we're going to start. Hubert, you would like to just say a few general words about the book itself, and then we have some questions. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Russell. Welcome, actually, everyone. I would like to embark you on a journey in Arctic. So I asked the technicians actually to lower the temperature. Now we are about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Soon will be 20 Fahrenheit. Because I love you all, we'll stop at 0 Fahrenheit tonight. Do you have the clicker for the slides, please, Felix? Thank you. So you're with me on this journey, you're starting to feel the cold, and I will embark you on a specific place. Thank you so much. We are that day, we are actually October 26, 1850. So you're with me in Arctic, and I want you to play the role of the Captain Robert McClure. Robert McClure was the captain of a vessel that I love, which is the HMS Investigator. So just figure that out. You left London, Plymouth actually a year ago, maybe in February. You have, for the first time with this ship, crossed the Cape Horn. You are the first ship on this Franklin search that actually will starting searching in the Arctic from the west. So you had to cross Cape Horn to enter actually the Bering Detroit, Sea Beaufort, and then for the first winter, you were into this Prince of Wales strait between Banks Island and Victoria Island, and you overwinter your ship. Everything is fine that day. It's a beautiful time. It's just 0 degrees Fahrenheit. But you're all safe. So by this beautiful day, you decided to do something. And with 6 men on a sled, you say, well, maybe it's time to check if really the Northwest Passage exists. And you know from the books that in 1819, a British explorer called Edward Parry went on Melville Island, just under the number 26. And from there, he saw a piece of land at basically 90 kilometers south. That day, you did the same path, but from the other side. So you're there, the two little guy over there, it's McClure and Samuel Gurney, this outstanding painter who did this, sketch, which is one of the 8 sketches given by him when he went back to the Queen Victoria. So you're there, and you're contemplating the rocks 90 kilometers north. You suddenly have solved, and this is the way he has written it in his journal, in his logbook, I have proven, after 5 centuries of research, that the Northwest Passage really exists, because we are seeing each other piece of land. So you're an outstanding man that day, an outstanding you make the world very happy. But Robert McClure was not really the best, let's say, loved captain. But there is one story you will find in our book, which I love about him. Before going there, he actually, when he was on Banks Island, he, in kind of his explorations on the Banks Islands, he arrived in a little tiny village of Inuit people. Just 3 or 4 families, but it's kind of igloos, ice huts, and they are very surprised. Yes, this is maybe the first time they do see white people. So they approach slowly, and of course they do trades, which is, at that time, they exchange food for needles, very useful actually in the Arctic. And on the way back, this group of maybe 10, 15 Inuits, very shy, there is a young little girl. A young little girl which actually come next to Robert McClure, and she approached like this, almost touching his scarf, because Robert McClure has a red scarf around his neck. And she's maybe 16, 17. She approached Robert and say, in Inuktitut, but he has a translator, can you tell me from which animal this red thing you have is coming from? So Robert McClure is very embarrassed, because he will say, okay, it's maybe the best manufacturer in England, for he can't say that. So by approaching, he noticed that this young lady, she has a baby on her back. So he takes the scarf around his own neck, and he gives the scarf to the young lady. And suddenly, the lady seems totally terrified. She's screaming, yelling. So nobody understands. And the interpreter asks an old person, what's going on? And they are all frozen. The 10 Inuits are frozen. The young lady take her kids, little baby, maybe 6 months, and give it to Robert McClure, which is totally embarrassed. It's a moment of emotion. What's going on? And then the translator explained, well, it seems she understood. You give her a gift which is red, she has never seen. So this is maybe your most outstanding, precious thing that you have. So in return, she has to give you something she loves, and it is a baby. Of course, he refused. So my book is full of those stories. Another one I love, before I give you the mic, is John Ross. John Ross actually did outstanding, of course, exploration. You will see that. One of the stories I love is this one. Now we are now in 1832. And John Ross is actually overwintering in Felix Harbor, south of Boothia Island. Again, he's meeting for the first time a much bigger village, maybe 30 people. They are in front of them, and they are just wondering what's going on. So with his officers and seamen, he's approaching the team. They all put their guns and on the ice. They observe themselves. And in the middle of the group, they do see actually to Lashio. He's maybe the older one, but he has just one leg because the other leg has been eaten by the polar bear. So, but he's a chief, he's a senior man, so he's helped by the community. And John Ross had an epiphany. He actually called the carpenter of the ship and said, can you make a wood leg to lash you? And it took him a few days. They came back a few days after with a wooden leg, which of course totally changed the life of Tulashiyu. And then the next 2 years, they actually spent together as neighbors. It has been an outstanding relationship between the natives of Boothia Island and the crew of the Victory, which was the name of the boat. All those stories and many more actually made me totally passionate about the history of the North. Thank you, Russell.
Those are both fantastic stories. So my task here will be to ask some provoking or eliciting questions of my esteemed colleagues here. And the first one is a rather more general one, right? Because people hear of the Northwest Passage. In the intro there, you heard people enthusiastically singing the Stan Rogers version with drums. And yet, what exactly was the Northwest Passage? Why was it not simply an idealistic goal of some kind, but something that navies and nations were willing to put enormous resources into discovering? And why was it so significant, right, for someone like McClure to see what he saw?
Yeah, so the amazing thing about the passage was it was a quick route to the Orient, essentially. It was cutting thousands and thousands of kilometers off the route around to the south. So, and it was also became a nationalistic, kind of element where different countries were trying to find this route, and so it became in a lot of societies this unbelievable drive to find that route to the passage. So after the French-English wars, there was a lot of capacity with all these talented mariners to start to look at this route and find a route through the passage. And so it became a real drive. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I could say that the dream to have a major route from the Atlantic to the Pacific or the other way around actually is not yet true. Like when Amundsen passed was 120 years ago, and then when we passed in 2003, exactly 1 century after, in 2003 we were number 91, so it was less than a boat per year. And now we are up to 465 ships altogether, ever. Last summer, 19 sailboats, or like pleasure craft, 10 cruise ship, 6 commercial. It's not like a busy route, but yeah. It's such a difficult area. The charts are really difficult to make. Drifting pack ice is still there. The ice is thinning, so it's breaking up further north. So then with the current and the wind, still hard to predict. So yeah, it's not yet a busy route. Maybe one day, but I'm not so sure.
And I just might add also, I've just spent 6 weeks at sea going through the Northwest Passage both ways, from Greenland to Kugluktuk copper mine, and then back again. So we were on an expeditionary ship sharing our knowledge and our experiences of moving through that. And so sometimes we get stuck with a vessel with 180 guests, and we get stuck in the ice. We've been stuck some years where we have to call in the Coast Guard, and we've got issues here. We're stuck in this pack ice, and so still this landscape is so powerful. The ice cap, the ice pack can move very quickly, and you can suddenly be in a very, this bizarre scenario where you're stuck in the pack ice. You've just had a lovely meal and some very fine wine, and you've had lectures and all these experiences, and suddenly, hey, we're stuck in the ice. We need to call the Coast Guard to push us out of here so we can get back to our homes across the world and be on time with our other lifestyles. So yeah, things can happen up there that are quite challenging and sometimes quite dramatic, where people have to get back to their law offices, or, you know, I've got a meeting in 2 days. What's going on? We're stuck in this ice. This wasn't part of the plan. And so these kind of things suddenly happen, and you're in this other world, you know, where everything is dictated to you by the wind, the ice, and this powerful environment. Yeah.
And this environment probably didn't change so much since Franklin time. So that's what is addictive. Yeah.
Yes, well, that's actually my next question, is the Franklin expedition. Interestingly, there was a rather large freighter just a few weeks ago, the Thamesburg, that ran aground in, of all places, the Franklin Strait. And it took 3 or 4 weeks to unload cargo and refloat it. It wasn't the ice in this case, it was the lack of really good charts. So even though we say, oh, there's the passage, right? So my next question actually has to do with the search for Franklin. This is an explorer who I specialize in, who famously disappeared sometime in the late part of 1845. Later on, they found his first winter camp from that first season, but his ships disappeared. Most of his men were missing. Nothing was found substantial until 2014 and 2016, when the ships were actually located, thanks to Inuit evidence. But my question is, you know, this search for Franklin, which consumed England for the better part of 15 years, what role did that play in exploration? Because they're looking for somebody who's lost, but of course they're also perhaps going places where no one has gone before.
I think we have to read or to look at the Franklin expeditions, putting things into perspective of what happens in the Arctic history within the 19th century. You have to picture that actually the Napoleonic Wars are finished. So in 1818, the British decided actually to try to solve two big mysteries. One of it, which is, as we said, the Northwest Passage. The second one, as important, very important for Franklin too, is that people believed the North Pole was a warm sea, because you have the current over there, because the whalers were looking at all the migrations of the whales north, the migrations of the caribous going north, the migration of the birds coming from Mexico to the north. So there was a very strong, deep believing that the North Pole was just a warm sea, meaning at a certain point going north on the Davis Strait, of course you will see some icebergs and piece of ice. Just go under, and once you emerge on the other side, sunny beach. So after that, after having proven that it was not really as easy, the British sent two explorations. Franklin voyages, before he went to on his ship, was exploring Canada or the Arctic from the land, and Parry from the north. So now we are in 1845, and maybe you remember that in 1840, some French explorer, Dumont d'Urville, found the Antarctica and the Terre Adélie from the name of his wife Adèle. So the British, they were not that happy that the French discovered the Antarctica before them. So John Barrow, leading the Admiralty in London, they said, oh, we have to go back to reality. And the British asked to actually discover the Northwest Passage, which should be extremely easy, because in 1845, we knew that others did it in the past. So they launched, May 1845, two outstanding ships, maybe too big, maybe overweighted, the Erebus and the Terror, with Crozier and Franklin and Fitzjames. Well, it will be a formality, maybe 18 months, and then they will go. So the story of Search for Franklin is actually, from my point of view, not only, of course, the expedition of the Erebus and Terror, but the work, the momentum created by Lady Jane Franklin. That day when they left Plymouth, actually, Lady Franklin, she hired some photographer to take pictures of those seamen. And when, of course, after 3 years, Franklin disappeared, she positively mobilized all England, all Great Britain, and Canada, and the US, and the French, and the Russian, all the royal family of Europe, actually to fund expedition to search her husband. But where she was really, for me, a genius, and maybe you could elaborate on that, because this is really your topic, Russell, when she was really a genius, is that instead of saying the world, help me to find my husband, she said to the world, my husband has disappeared in the Arctic, which is unknown. Go and explore the Arctic, map the Arctic, and then you will be doing great and positive things for the world. So she motivated 15 and 20 years of research in the Arctic by pushing every countries actually to finance expedition to map all the Arctic land.
Yes, that's quite right. And I'll just add, Lady Franklin is credited by Joseph Conrad, who, as you may know, was a sea captain as well as a novelist. He said he spoke of her perseverance in trying to send people to find her husband, and she said the great navigator Sir John Franklin served geography even in death, and I think that's quite right. So I'm curious though, because one of the things, and this is my next question, you know, we think of these Hearts of Oak and these fine ships and very dedicated persons aboard them, but working with, you know, basically just a sextant and a table of lunar altitudes and a few other things, you know, with very well wound chronometers so they wouldn't lose track of their longitude. But you think of their feats and the extraordinary things that they accomplished, and now, you know, we have GPS, we have, you know, forward-facing sonars. We have all these things that, at least in theory, should prevent us from getting as lost as anyone got lost back then. So how do we compare, you know, contemporary navigation, and what kinds of challenges still remain despite all of our technological prowess?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think of the, you know, the challenges, and also they were also mapping the territory. And although they were traveling with guides in some cases that might have known the landscape intimately, there were so many challenges to navigation. When you look today, when we're out in the Arctic now, we have an inReach device which allows us to text each other anywhere on the planet. We can send images to our friends anywhere on the planet. We have apps like Windy, Gaia. So with Windy, I can look and see if there's a katabatic wind coming off Ellesmere Island, Devon, whatever, and plan accordingly. With Gaia, I can pinpoint my exact position with you know, various GPS scenarios. And so it's unbelievable the technology that is developed that allows us in modern exploration to just, you know, text friends. I can be lying in my tent at 60 below with howling winds, and I can send out a message from my inReach device that goes up to a satellite and then shoots to a geostationary satellite and then rockets down to wherever my friends are in the planet. I mean, it is absolutely stunning. If Franklin had this device, he had his inReach, he could have just fired that note up and say, can you help? I've been stuck in the ice for 3 years off King William Island, and I want to go home, you know, so.
Yeah, last summer, you heard about Tamara Klink. She's a young Brazilian girl. She sailed the Northwest Passage on a small sailboat alone. So that this is really showing that with technology, with autopilot, a good radar that is telling you where is the ice, even in the fog or dark when you get a bit late in the season, with a good eco sounder. Even if there is no chart, you can see even a little bit ahead of the ship. You can see how the seafloor looks like. So you can just go single-handed now, and with the good alarm systems, and of course it's such a difference, like you're saying, and such a difference.
And behind them, so that they didn't hit a rock or go aground. So you had these poor guys that were just toiling away in front of the vessel to sound, to see if it was even safe to go in these areas. So yeah.
So it seems that technologically, even though I guess we're doing the same things, we're just doing them with a lot less difficulty, and yet it's still not quite enough, you know. And I mean, you and I, Mike, have served on ships like the Ioffe, which is a very well-made, Finnish-constructed ex-Soviet research vessel. As I recall, the ice in that season had forced them into an unusual route, and so they were not in a typical shipping lane. And I was using that magical technology you spoke of to talk with some friends, because I had just gotten off the ship in Pond Inlet, and I suddenly started getting all these messages. I said, "What's happening?" He said, "Well, we were in the briefing room, which in the Ioffe is way down on the lower deck, and we heard this terrible scraping noise, and we were doing a safety briefing." I said, "A safety briefing? What happened?" And they had hit a rock with their, vessel that had all of those modern technologies at its service, but on a channel, I guess, that just was not very well charted in terms of depth soundings and trying to make their schedule and get to the next place so that the passengers would have something to see, and they did.
Yeah, even the Canadian Coast Guards, they like to follow their routes, like in Ferry and Nekla. This is one, like a tricky part between Baffin and Hudson Bay. And they don't like to go off route, and they say they really hope not to have to rescue any boat because there is no chart, so they are happy to stick to their usual route. Even the Canadian Coast Guard told me.
Yeah, just 3 weeks ago, we were going into uncharted waters with a major vessel in Greenland in the Canadian Arctic, and there's huge areas they're totally uncharted. So we were using a high-speed Zodiac shooting ahead of the vessel with a modern ice-strengthened vessel, but we were creating new chart routes where no big vessel had been before. So we're highly stressed, going with a Zodiac and sounding for the vessel and exploring new routes. So we really felt like modern day explorers going where some people had been going before, but maybe in Inuit with kayaks or umiaks or whatever. But we had a big vessel that we were responsible for. So we were going ahead, sounding, and getting into new landscapes which were mind-blowing, with 2,000-3,000 foot walls coming out of the ocean, and seeing new landscapes with modern technology, but still being absolutely stunned the same way the early explorers were centuries ago by those glorious landscapes that just take your breath away.
Well, that's a perfect segue for my next question, Mike, because we speak of exploration, we speak of expedition cruises, we talk in some ways as though these areas were still unknown, and of course they are, in fact, unknown in certain respects, right? And also I think the Arctic is so dynamic, so changeable. So on a ship I was on a couple of years ago, our ice pilot was a fellow who had been a Canadian Coast Guard captain, and he had been going up Banks Island, and he knew of the Cresswell drawings of Investigator, and he actually tried to get his ship into the same spot because he wanted to have a picture, and then he got his helicopter pilot up there to get the right angle, so it would remind him of what it was that McClure had, what was in Cresswell's drawing. But I think, that's an interesting question, because we go up there. For those of us who yourselves have been up many, many times, this is not entirely new. For the passengers, it's usually new. But we are, I think, still explorers in some sense. It's just a slightly different sense. And we have responsibilities, I think, also that previous explorers would not have had, whether it's being careful not to stress wildlife, or doing, as you say, with the pilot boat and trying to chart as you go. You're responsible for the safety of many people. And it is very unpredictable, despite all the devices and technologies we have. So I was wondering if each of you could say something about what you would say it is to be an explorer today.
Have you got an image there of what have we got? Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, here's a classic painting of, this is the Death March. This is a painting of the Death March of Franklin on King William Island in the Northwest Passage. And I I started following Franklin in the 70s. This is a self-portrait of me along the Death March route, and I found this skull. We were sailing a Hobie Cat through the passage for National Geographic in the 80s, and we took 3 summers from 86 to 88 and sailed a Hobie Cat through the passage. But this was along the Death March route, and I found this skull with a lot of carbonized material nearby, and you could really feel the ghosts of Franklin. We were right where they were pulling these boats, and they ended up cannibalizing each other, and we'll talk more about that later. But they were so desperate. They had been in the ice for 3 years, floating about in multi-year ice, and they finally abandoned their vessels, and they began to head south on this death march. So I found this skull, I photographed it, I thought about, you know, is this one of Franklin's men? And then about 2 years later, a forensic pathologist went up to this area. She was from McMaster University, and she found bones along this area, and she confirmed that indeed they were cannibalized femurs. They had been cut with saws, and so they had been eating each other because of a desperate scenario that had happened. There's all kinds of conjecture tied to everything from, you know, from botulism in the cans and a number of different scenarios that drove them to this kind of desperate level. But it was very powerful to find artifacts on such along that death march route.
Yeah, I think exploring is, to me, and yeah, this picture could tell, is all about science. Like, not only science is a way to contribute to the better knowledge of this very fragile environment, which is the Arctic. Photography is, of course, a way, filming and art is a way. But from my background and my commitment for the last 30 years is really science. And in this fast-changing environment, we even need more of the science, and we need to make it accessible to everyone. And that's the challenge, to make the science findings accessible. This is a science expedition I did a few years ago in the central of the Arctic Ocean, where we're 100 people on board. So the ship is a German icebreaker called Mosaic, and it was adrift like Nansen for a year. So I spent 5 months. There was some crew change.
Wow, that's remarkable. Well, segueing from that, I think that the other thing that the word explorer perhaps applies to is to be an explorer of the archives. You know, so many things have been collected, and sometimes it's only been recently that we've seen some of these images, seen some of these artifacts, and of course, in the case of Franklin's ships, underwater archaeologists have been bringing them up. So, Hubert, I wanted to ask you, as someone who's been an explorer of the archives, what some of your recent explorations and exciting finds have been.
So yeah, so to do the book, first I explore my own collections, but I have a funny story actually linked to Franklin, which is, yeah. Haha. When I was reading the McClintock is really the one on the Fox who found the only proof of the death of Sir John Franklin, and with the dates on a piece of document, you will see there is one very well-known document which is reproduced everywhere. In my book, you will see actually absolutely unpublished one, which is, you may have seen that, when actually McClure found this piece of document into a cairn, actually in a box, into the cairn which was built many years before by John Ross. It was written exactly what happens to John Franklin and everyone. And on the way back to UK, to Brittany, one of the officers, he copied step by step in proper language all the text that he has found. And you will see this document published in my book. But when I was reading the account of McClintock, One thing surprised me, because in the list of what they have found on the King William's Island, I have found these things in red, a New Testament in French language. So I step back and I say, wow, give me a minute. We are now in 1848. You have maybe out of the 129 seamen on Erebus and Terror, there are maybe only 50, 55 left. They have decided to abandon their ships, Erebus and Terror, and try to find a way walking south to Back River, maybe, 1,000 kilometers in the ice. Why? Some of them has taken with him a New Testament in French. So I looked at all the background, all the biography of the 129 seamen. None of them were French. None of them were even Canadian French. There was no reason. So for me, it's still a mystery why one of the seamen decided in his little backpack, when he has to carry food and everything for basically 1,000 kilometers, why did he take this little Bible? And I started to investigate. And I say, if this Bible has been taken from the ice in 1859, it is somewhere in the world. And this was my exploration. And I have found it. I have found it where it has to be, which is in the archive of the Maritime Greenwich Museum. Now, it's not published, it's not everywhere. I have found that after many, let's say, search and emails and phone calls using InReach sometimes maybe. And I asked them if I could have a look, because I wanted to see if maybe there was a name or an inscription. So that was last March, I think, I went to the archive of the Maritime Museum in Greenwich, and there was a room maybe half this size. The head of the archive was a lady, and she introduced me of this room. You just see a portion of this room. On this piece of black thing, there is this little Bible. And I arrived fully alone, this Bible in front of me. I put my hand on it. I was unable to touch it. She touched it for me. She flipped the pages one by one for me, actually in few pieces. But look at the size, very small. Very lightweight. Well, yeah, very lightweight. But so I asked her, I mean, is anyone do some research why this Bible in French was found there? No one did it. So if you have any ideas why a British seaman officer decided to do a march in the ice, 1,000 kilometers, bringing even a tiny French Bible, that will help me a lot. Maybe you have the answer tonight.
Well, I have a piece of an answer. There was actually one sailor who sailed with Franklin who was from Newfoundland, but I believe he was from an English-speaking area.
He was, yeah.
Yeah, so that doesn't help us there. I did look into the translation though, because you were kind enough to send me this image, and you know, just as with the English Bible, there are several different versions of the French Bible, and you'll see it's I think chapter 23 of the Acts of the Apostles. There, the right-hand column. It says, "Alors Agrippa." That means it's the Osterwald translation of the Bible, because that's the only one that has the word "alors" in front of the name of Agrippa. And it's probably published by a missionary society, because they published books in this size to be portable and inexpensive, sort of give them away like a Gideon's Bible sort of a thing. And actually the largest publisher of these, including French ones, was in Edinburgh. So I think there's some interesting traces to be found still. I'd like to know more.
The most likely hypothesis that actually was provided by me was the following. As I said, Lady Jane was raised in France. John Franklin had maybe 2,000 books on the two ships. he knew that one exit for him was to cross the north of Canada, which was French-speaking territories. So there is an option that actually Lady Jane give them a little Bible in French just to communicate with the natives and the Amerindians north of Canada, which were speaking more French than English. And Sir John Franklin wanted to communicate actually with natives.
That's a very interesting dynamic, because so Franklin in 1821 did an epic journey across Canada and then down the Coppermine River, and he was with a group of French voyageurs in a canot de maître, in a birch bark. They traveled in birch bark canoes on an epic journey across Canada, and in 1821 descended the Coppermine River, and so he would have absorbed a lot of French. So I think we're linked there to a French voyageur scenario where he may have learned enough French about, that.
Yeah, it explains why that book was on the ship. It doesn't explain why the book was in the backpack of a seaman who has 1,000 kilometers to do in the ice.
That's fascinating. It's interesting too, because I've made it a project of mine to try to trace all of the books that we know of that were carried aboard the ships. And sometimes the contents of the whale boats that they were dragging are listed out as, oh my God, look at all of this Victorian bric-a-brac, and a list of books. Famously, the Vicar of Wakefield was aboard one of those boats of rescue that they were trying to survive on. But my next question actually involves Dr. John Ray. And interestingly, he was one of the first people who he very much adapted to native traditions and had worked as a Hudson's Bay trader for some years. He had a considerable library with him. If you go to his memorial at the cathedral in Stromness, you'll see a wonderful statue of him, and underneath him are all these teeny tiny books, about the same size as the one you found. So having some books was perhaps a necessity there. But I wondered if you could say something more about John Ray and why he caught your
John Ray is
attention.
really fascinating, because in the history of explorations, it's really a milestone in such a way that is maybe one of the first to really having adopted the way of living of the Inuit and the Amerindians in order to explore north of Canada and all the Arctics. He lived with them. He actually learned a lot from them. He was dressed from them, and not in, let's say, more traditional manufacturers from England. And this is the way he was able to survive in a very rough environment. After him, most of the explorers who have really succeeded in Arctic explorations, they definitely actually adopted the way of living of all the Inuit populations who were living in the north for more than 5,000 years.
Yeah, John Ray was really my hero also in terms of what he did and his epic journeys. He was a surgeon. He was super fit. He lived in a place called Moosonee, so he worked with the Cree, with Inuit for years before he started to do some of these epic journeys. And of course, we know he's the one who met the Inuit and got the stories of cannibalism and such directly from the Inuit, and also got artifacts. Some of the Inuit had the spoons of the British Admiralty around their necks. They had all kinds of, they had eyeglasses, all these amazing objects that they had collected from some of these sites where Franklin's men had passed away. And so he gathered all this information, and he was also fluent in various languages. And so he was an absolutely amazing man coming from the Stromness area. And as Russell said, this is the most powerful, I think it's the most moving sculpture I've ever seen in my life of Ray in this church in Stromness, where he's lying very comfortable. It's a beautiful, huge marble statue. And it's bigger than life size, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And so it's just the most stunning sculpture of someone who I've followed, in my life of exploration. And it's just, if you get a chance to see that, it is absolutely incredible.
You can even see the laces on his moccasins. I mean, it's really remarkable. So that actually segues into my next question here too, just to ask you, Hubert, about the role of indigenous peoples of the Arctic, and it wouldn't be limited to the Inuit, but of other indigenous peoples in exploration.
Yeah, so with so many of the early explorers, a lot of them had translators, guides, and outstanding Inuit, Cree, different folks, Dene, moving across that Arctic landscape. And a lot of especially Inuit folk have what I call photographic memories. They have stunning, they are so tied to the land, they completely impregnate the landscape in their brains. And so some of the early drawings, for instance, were drawn for various explorers, and complete exactitude of drawing with a pencil, of showing the landscape. They just knew it so intimately. And one of my most powerful experiences of traveling with Inuit, I've spent many months, like 4 and 5 months, traveling by dog team with Inuit friends, retracing journeys from oral history. And one landscape we traveled through in absolute whiteout for days, in howling winds. And my Inuit friend was navigating by reading the snowdrifts, not by looking out. He was navigating by looking down, reading the angle of the snowdrifts, and knowing which direction he was going by looking at his feet. And he was so intimate with the landscape that he knew where certain wind directions came and created snowdrifts, and he cut that snowdrift on a certain angle to come right to a camp that was hundreds of kilometers away. Unbelievable, yeah.
Yeah, when we met with Hubert in Greece, you were there too. We were 50 kilometers away from the village. Greasefjord is 120 people south Ellesmere Island, and the dark period is 3.5 months with no sun. So I was used to just feel driving the skidoo, just feel the snowdrift. And if you feel like the skidoo is going a little bit more like this than it should be, then it means that you are turning. So you don't even have to look at the GPS or whatever. You just feel how the snowdrift are moving your skidoo. If it's moving a different way, then you're losing your track. It's very fun.
Well, looking down here, I see I missed a question I had meant to ask about a Frenchman who is important in the Franklin story and in expedition history generally, that Hubert, you wish to speak about. I'm assuming that was Bellot.
Oh, yes.
We skipped over the slide, I'm afraid.
Bellot, yeah.
Yes. Did you want to say anything in particular about him? He's quite a remarkable figure.
Yes, actually, among all these explorers, there is one unique Frenchman who participated and lost his life. Lost his life by helping rescuing hundreds of seamen. It's Joseph René Bellot. He was on the Prince Albert, and he was one of the French seamen who was detached by the French Navy to actually participate to the effort, the European effort, the worldwide effort led by Jane Franklin to search for his husband. What happened to him was, after 2 years overwintering on actually Boothia, he came to Beechey Island, where in 1852, 1853, and 54 was 3 years of just outstanding cold in the Arctic. There was around 18 vessels from around the world frozen in the ice, a lot of seamen with a lot of scurvy here, and they were needed to actually be sent back to UK. But in order to send sick men to UK, they needed the paper, the order signed by the Admiral Belcher. But poor Admiral Belcher, he was also overwintering and squeezed in his boat, actually 200 kilometers north on the Wellington Passage. So without his signed order, the Brits were unable to ship this old sick man back to UK. So they asked for a volunteer to get the signature of Admiral Belcher. And Bellot volunteered after basically 2 years of tough job on a Prince Albert ship. He went north, get the signature, and actually a few miles before reaching Beachy, he was with 2 other companions, trying to help them to figure out the level of the ice. He slept on the ice, fall, and disappeared in the ice. So the British did from him an outstanding hero. And if you go to actually the Maritime Museum in south of London, you see in 1855 this sculpture, this monument being built by Queen Victoria to celebrate this Frenchie helping the Brits, which is still there in 2025 when I was there visiting the archive of the Museum for the Little Bible. So I found these images very, very funny. On Beachy Island, where we were actually a few years ago, you have this cenotaph. And I will say that with Mike and actually one of my sons here in the front, we went there in 2 years ago, right? I wanted to celebrate my anniversary, May 10th, as yours, Natalie, my 67th anniversary by a ski trip with my kids and Mike to actually be on this beachy island, which is where the kind of mythic island in the old Franklin Search.
Yes, and I'm also meant to ask you about an American explorer that you had in mind.
So I have 2 favorites, but I mean one which is this guy, Elisha Kent Kane. He's from Cincinnati. And when he was 16 years old, he discovered that he had a kind of heart disease. So he said, well, I want to take care of myself, I will become a medical doctor. And he studied medical school just to actually try to take care of his own heart, which he did. And after that, he joined the US Navy and did various things. On the way back from Africa on this US Navy ship, he learned about the search of Sir John Franklin, all this big movement done by Lady Jane. And he said, America as part of that, I will do it. And he found a rich man in New York, Grinnell, a brewer, to finance his first expeditions. He went over there, did the first expeditions. Of course, he didn't find anything. But he went actually to a kind of being totally passionate about the North. He didn't find anything because it was looking north, while Franklin was south. But when he came back, he said, I want to go back. But maybe finding money in New York or in the States to finance a second expedition to help the Brits, maybe not the best idea. While there's still a mystery which is unsolved. Is the North Pole a warm sea or not? That's a story that Americans will love. And he started to actually raise the money to fund an expedition to check if the North Pole was warm or cold, which he did, but it was maybe not totally the best way he was prepared. So 2 days before leaving Brooklyn, he only had 15 seamen on his ship, which is not a lot to do a big expedition. At least he did more. So he went in all the bars of Brooklyn. He found 2 Daves. He found a French Canadian too. Come on board. He put them on board on his ship, the rescue, and they went north. And he did an outstanding expedition, which at the end was a total disaster. But I love him for something he has written in his book. At the end of his story, there is a small sentence which is a summary of all his believings. When I will tell you what he has written at the end of the book, believe me, you will remember it all your life. Because this is so accurate. This is the hottest topic of this century. We are in 1856. he has written a sentence that, honestly, I would like all of us to share with our kids. He has written the following thing. Keep in mind, we are in 1856. If the temperature increased by 4 degrees, the world will never be the same. We are in 1856, and this is how he's ending his book.
Wow. That's remarkable. As it happens, just yesterday I was over at the Kane Lodge here in New York, and we were having a gathering there to give an award to Menson Bound and his work on the Endurance. But there you can still see the fair Augusta. She's the figurehead of Kane's boat, the Advance, and she has a place of honor in a lit-up cabinet in the corner. Apparently, as they were escaping from the ships, they took her with them, hoping they wouldn't have to use her as firewood. And apparently they did not. So, yeah, Kane is still remembered to this day, here in New York especially. So my next question applies to new projects, to new horizons. So I'd like to ask each of you, and I think Mike, you and Hubert have something, but you also are going back to your ship, is that correct? You're returning to your...
Yeah, I mean, my sailboat have been running for the last 25 years, busy till last summer, but I'm going to be involved in a new project with a new, funny-looking boat, which is like, this one. And so it's a new French boat that is being tested to do the same nonsense drift. The plan is to do 10 drift over the next 20 years. So the boat is just been tested. We are going in late November to the north of Baltic Sea to do some tests and trials in the ice and the cold. Then back to the shipyard to finalize the ship. And then the first drift will start in August. I'll be on board for 8 months. And then there will be the first, Polaris 1. So you probably hear about it because it's a really international science project. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so actually, Mike and I, we are preparing an expedition next year on one of my favorite, let's say, stories about the North. You saw, we talked about the Investigator. We talked about this ship, actually, which was on frozen for basically 4 years. But the crew was actually saved by a young officer, a young lieutenant, who in 1853 came to and saved them. So if you remember the beginning of the story, I was talking to you about McClure and his Investigator, the beginning of the trip. Few years after, they went to point B over there in Mersey Bay, and they overwinter there. The point is that actually they overwinter 1 winter, 2 winters, 3 winters, and they all started actually to get scurvy, and actually they were about to pass away. And one day, April 6, 1853, that guy, solo with a sledge and few other people, came to save them. When you will read my book or their story, you will see actually the level of emotion of McClure, which is out somewhere with his surgeon. They were digging or finding a way of dig into the ice, actually for the first seaman who passed away the previous day. And they were saved by Bedford Pym, who left Daly Island over there, crossed the south from north to south, the Northwest Passage, enter into Mersey Bay, and discover that actually the Investigator were there. Next year, Mike and I, we will redo their trips. Now, this guy, Bedford Pym, he was 27 years old. Mike and I, we are a little more than that. So he did it in 3 weeks. We just count 3 months to do it, April, March, and June. But we will do it following his steps, following his logbooks, using actually his maps, exactly these maps. And we will, of course, stop on all those historical spots which are described in all the chapters of my book. This is our next project for next year, Russell.
Yeah, so for us older guys, I'm 69. Hubert's, are you 70 yet? Okay, Hubert's already 70. And then we have a very young filmmaker, super fit guy, who's just so fit. So he's got to run ahead and be filming on the ice pack. He's got to be tearing around all over the place as we travel at a top speed of 3.5 kilometers an hour on a downhill slope, pulling our sleds. So we'll be pulling sleds and traveling about 550 kilometers on that route to the Investigator, and we'll travel many more 100 kilometers going off the actual track to, to look at other sites. So traveling by sled is a very beautiful experience. Of course, you're not going quickly, but you get into a beautiful rhythm, and so you're moving through the landscape, and I think of it as it's a different kind of musical journey for your body. So you have the wind and the ice and all the elements challenge you, but you're just moving in a very slow, mindful way through these landscapes. So we'll have the journals of these men and the kind of the epic aspects of what they were doing, and we'll be doing it in a more modern way. We'll have ultralight modern sleds that are made out of polyolefin material that can float on the open water if we have to move across open water. And we'll be going through pressure ice and what's called multi-year ice, which can be 20, 30, 60 years old, and it's super hard and it's very convoluted. So it won't be a nice flat surface, it will be an undulating, challenging surface.
And I forgot to mention that the ship Investigator is still actually under the ice by 5 meters under the water. It has been rediscovered in 2010, something like this, by Parks Canada. And the Canadian organization is quite actually supportive of our expeditions. They plan eventually to be there to resend sonar to see how that ship is. They have not dived on this site the past 20 years. So it will be a quite neat, unique situation if we come back exactly like Bedford Pym to actually see what's going on this Mercy Bay early June next year.
And also, for a lot of the time, we'll be in 24 hours of daylight. So when we initially start, we'll have darkness, but as we keep moving, we get into 24 hours of daylight, which is absolutely stunning to move through. So oftentimes we even travel, we do what we call sleeping upside down. We sleep in the day and we ski at night in this gorgeous light, which is, for a photographer from like myself, it's absolutely magical. Everything looks gorgeous. You're in a perpetual sunset where the light is super low, so there's textures and the quality of light is just gorgeous. So being in that perpetual light is both stimulating, but it can be exhausting because at night you've got all that sunlight coming in. So you have to blind yourself either with a black mask or whatever, because it's so stimulating. You want to be out all the time, but you've got to have some rest when you're pulling this load every day for 2 months.
And in his journal, it was mandatory for him to actually do some measurement of wind and temperature by locations. So I have the exact location where twice a day he was taking the measurement of the weather, the force of the wind, the direction of the wind, the temperature under shadow and under the sun. So we have that from the year 1853, March, and we will do exactly the same, using the same form he was using.
That's amazing. Well, thank you both for that. And Do we have? I hope we have some time for some questions from the audience. Maybe two. We'll do our best, and then of course we'll be here in a moment after. Yes.
Just how did this young lieutenant save those people? He came by dog sled. Did he leave the?
Are we talking about Lieutenant Pym?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't believe that he used a dog sled. Did he? Pym. Bradford Pym. The British weren't at this stage in time.
No, there was no dogs.
Had not
actually,
learned how to use dogs.
There was maybe one dog, just to let's say avoid being disturbed by polar bears. This is the best way to fight polar bears, actually, or to be aware of the polar bears. But the sled was pulled by men, 6 men, typically 6 men, 1 officer. So Bedford Pym, he follows the rules: 6 men, 1 officer.
What a way to travel.
Sorry? Put him in the sled and then they went back. How did they save them? They put him in the sled. Well, you have to figure out that actually those seamen on the Investigator, they have not seen someone else outside of the crew for 3 years. So just the fact seeing a human coming to them, it's very well described in the book, in all the 4 books written by the 4 key people of the crew. It gives a high morale to everyone. There were 17 really sick men, and he went back to the Delhi Island in actually 2 weeks on the way back, following a total different route, much smoother. And then they sent back few sledges, and Cresswell, which was on board of the Investigator, put all the 17 seamen on those 4 or 5 sledges, and he went from Delhi Island to Beachy Island, where they were able, actually, thanks to Bellot, to bring all them to UK. And then the following year, they evacuated the Investigator because there was no way he was able to actually get out of the ice.
Yeah. It may be worth noting, too, that they did lose 1 man along the way, the unfortunate Thomas Morgan. And he'd been transferred to the ship, the North Star, from the Investigator. And they decided to bury him next to Franklin's men's graves on Beachy Island. So his is the 4th headstone.
And a fascinating aspect of the Investigator, before it sunk, after the men abandoned it and they headed east towards Delhi Island and then Beachy, Inuit found out about this vessel that was still, and this would be a treasure trove of oak and metal and copper, and so they collected some of this material before it sunk. It was in the pack ice, and so on a journey a couple of years ago, I ran a wild river on Beachy, or sorry, not Beachy, on Banks Island, and I actually found parts of the ship inland at certain locations where the Inuit had used those incredible artifacts of oak and metal and to make, harpoons and such for hunting muskox. And the island of Banks has the highest muskox population in the world. So canoeing this river, we found artifacts from the Investigator that was collected by Inuit in the 1850s and then used to enrich their lives as they hunted muskox and caribou on the island, on Banks Island. Amazing to find those artifacts just sitting on the landscape. Question?
I also had a question about the book itself and the publication. You're saying, how important the science is and the history, but these books are like museum quality. They're just spellbinding, the stories, and you're having film crews, and we'll be reading about it in the news, but if you could tell us just about the putting together all the ephemera and the maps and the stories, just the book itself is just so glorious. Just how you're putting the books together.
Well, actually, it's a teamwork, including some key contributor in this room, who Julian and Melissa, who helped me actually to design the book itself. I am a collector, and one day I decided to share my collections, and the best way is actually to do a book on your own collection. So I have digitalized more than 6,000 of images from all the books all around those expeditions, which has allowed specifically Julian, artistic director, to actually focus on some details of those images. If you look at the original, maybe it's 5 inches by 6 inches, but you will see in my book, it's actually 2 feet by 1 feet. And you see all the details, specifically the tattoos on the face of the people. You see the details of the tools, just amazing.
I just wanted to come back to your story about the Bible. We can only speculate as to the seaman's relationship with his God and as to why he chose to take a Bible with him at all, irrespective of what language. But I'm sure you're aware of the very significant French missionary presence amongst the Inuit population in the 1840s, 50s. In particular, were very well, at the time, well-known cardinal who came back to the court of Louis XIV, 15th, with pieces of labradorite and rock, which he had brought back from that part of the world as part of his interest in... Anyway, there is a very significant French missionary presence amongst the Inuit population, which might explain
I will love to know more. I will love to know more from you. Maybe
well, I'm very happy
outside.
to tell you.
I didn't know all that. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Very precious objects which relate to this period, and the material itself comes from that part of the world.
Amazing. No, I didn't know. So this is exploration too, huh?
Yes, and the Oblate missionaries traveled extensively through the Arctic and learned Inuktitut, but a lot of those missionaries were later than this, a little bit later. But you mentioned the Labradorite, where there was an earlier group on the Labrador coast that were in there, I think, late 1700s. And what was the missionary at Hebron feared? The mission in terms of the religion in Hebron, do you remember?
Oh, well, I mean, they were the Moravian Brethren.
Yeah,
yes,
the Moravian, yeah, exactly, the Moravians, yeah.
And on the Investigator, there was one, Mirchung was a brother of the Moravian order who was on board the ship. So, yeah. But they were German speakers. More questions? We have time?
We're at a point in history where a lot of things happened about 100 years ago in many different sort of topics, or, you know, and you mentioned you did go for an expedition that was reenacting what happened 100 years ago. You're going to go next year for that expedition you just described. My question is there anything, what's to be discovered now that hasn't been discovered there in the north?
You know, just by the retreat of the land ice, even the satellites, they don't know what is under the glaciers. And some glaciers, they lose up to 100 meters every year. Like, you know, they retreat from all the maritime glaciers. So we discover new islands, new fjords, new bay, just this. And then the seafloor, we have so much to discover, because it's good to know the surface, but the North Pole is 4,000 meters deep. The Arctic Ocean is a lot of water. You have a mix of Atlantic Ocean water, cold water. I mean, it's the thermostat of the world. So if there is no sea ice, then it collects the heat from the sun, and it's all changing. So all this, on a science point of view, it's a lot to discover.
Is that the end of our time? Well.
Thank you, everyone. Make sure you pick up a copy of Hubert's book outside on the landing.